and give you simple instructions to be on the program. You can also join us through Zoom video by going to ebiblefellowship.org and clicking the icon at the top. If you're calling in from another country, on our website, select the toll-free button to find your country's number.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's new open forum program. During this time, we're going to open up the phone lines to take your call, and each listener is invited to give us a call if you have a question or a comment about the Bible, and I'll try to respond by going to the Bible. I apologize that we're starting a little late. We're having a few technical difficulties once again. And so why don't we just get right to it? Let's go to the first person on the phone tonight. Welcome to our question and answer program. Please go ahead with your call.
Yeah, hi, Chris McCann. Can I listen tonight and you just mute me and stop taking me off the program?
Yeah, you don't have to explain. You don't have to explain. That's fine.
I just wanted to tell you, I asked permission because I might get kicked off. Okay.
Mike, yeah, well, hopefully you won't. But let's go to the next person on the phone. Welcome to our program. Please go ahead with your call.
Hi, can you read 1 Kings 17, verse 2 to 6?
1 Kings 17, starting in verse 2. And the word of Jehovah came unto him, saying, Get thee hence, and turn thee eastward, and hide thyself by the brook Cherith, that is before Jordan, and it shall be that thou shalt drink of the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed thee there. So he went and did according unto the word of Jehovah, for he went and dwelt by the brook Cherith, that is before Jordan, and the ravens brought him bread and flesh in the morning, and bread and flesh in the evening, and he drank of the brook.
My question is, who do the ravens represent? What does the raven represent?
Yeah, well, a raven, excuse me, a raven is an unclean bird. And I don't know. I don't have a spiritual definition for them beyond that. We find a raven mentioned in the flood account. And there's a raven or ravens mentioned in I think it's Isaiah 34 in the context of Judgment Day. Isaiah 34 says in verse 11, But the cormorant and the bittern shall possess it, the owl also, and the raven shall dwell in it, and he shall stretch out upon it the line of confusion, the stones of emptiness. And it may be mentioned another time in this passage. Let me see. Yeah, maybe not. But the word raven here is Strong's number 6158, and it's found 10 times. And a couple of the times we saw in the passage you brought up, 1 Kings 17. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure of the spiritual definition or what it would be pointing to here is God is using the raven to provide bread and water, to provide nourishment for his servant Elijah, and I don't understand that.
Also in Job 38:41, That one has a little bit more details.
Let's see, Job 38:41. Who provideth for the raven his food? When his young ones cry unto God, they wonder for lack of meat. Yeah, God provides the food for the ravens, for all creatures, and they're birds of the air or fowls of the air. I believe they identify with Satan and Satan's kingdom, being unclean animals, unclean birds. But again, I just don't know too much more about them. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for calling and sharing. And let's go to the next person on the phone tonight. Welcome to our question and answer program. Please go ahead with your call.
Good evening, Chris. What a blessing it is to have the Q&A. God has really comforted us with a program like this. After Mr. Camping's passing, I remember a couple of years we didn't have a program like this, so very thankful. Could you go to Matthew chapter 28, verse 11 and 12, and I have another verse to compare it with?
Yeah, Matthew 28. Well, actually, we've been doing some form of a Q&A, e-Bible, since 2001. So this is our 23rd year. But some form, sometimes it was once a week. Sometimes it was 2 or 3 times a week. But as far as this particular set and doing it 5 days, well, we're doing it 6 days a week, but Monday through Friday. Yeah, we just started doing that maybe about 4 years ago.
Oh, you mean like in the Pal Talk days?
Yeah, it was on Pal Talk. We were on Free Conference Call, FCC, if anyone remembers that. And we had people call up on Pal Talk or Free Conference. So we're not really novices concerning this format or taking people's calls. It's been over 20 years. Okay, where was that again? Matthew chapter 20.
Yeah, Matthew chapter 28, verse 11 and 12, and I have another verse to compare it with.
Matthew 28, 11 and 12. Now, when they were going, behold, some of the watch came into the city and showed unto the chief priests all the things that were done. And when they were assembled with the elders and had taken counsel, they gave large money unto the soldiers, saying, Say ye, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we slept. And if this come to the governor's ears, we will persuade him and secure you. So they took the money and did as they were taught. And this saying is commonly reported among the Jews until this day.
And Matthew chapter 27, verses 52 to 54, please.
Okay, 27:52. And the graves were open, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose and came out of the graves after his resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared unto many. Now when the centurion and they that were with him watching Jesus saw the earthquake and those things that were done, they feared greatly, saying, Truly, this was the Son of God.
So, Chris, my question is, I'm trying to intellectually understand how they were able to disregard the physical proofs that Jesus was God. I know the Israelites, which saw the many wonderful miracles, they did not have true belief. But at least on the physical level, they never denied that God exists. They just had unbelief in their hearts. So did the Pharisees, did they ever have guilt? Did they ever have any emotional grief? I know God doesn't record that, but I'm trying to wrap my head around the fact that the elders, they conspired, they took counsel, so they may have discussed implications that they were wrong. So how does that relate to our day with understanding the truth but not believing it and actually covering it up intellectually, not as a spiritual understanding, but unbelief? Thank
Well,
you.
a lot of the Pharisees believed on Christ intellectually. Well, we know, first of all, Nicodemus. If we read John 3, and he was a Pharisee, and he came to Jesus, and he said in verse 2, the same came to Jesus by night and said unto him, Rabbi, we know, not I know, we know that thou art a teacher come from God, for no man can do these miracles that thou doest except God be with him. So that was one statement. And also in John 12, we read in verse 42, nevertheless, among the chief rulers, also many believed on him. But because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue, for they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. So many of the chief, rulers, the princes, could be chief priests even, many of them, not a few, many believed, probably for the same reason as Nicodemus, yet their sticking point was confession. And this is why, we read in 1 John, in 1 John 4, that the Lord writes in verse 2, hereby know ye the Spirit of God, every spirit that confesseth that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is of God, and every spirit that confesseth not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God, and this is that spirit of Antichrist, whereof ye have heard that it should come, and even now already is it in the world. So every spirit that confesseth that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh. Now, this confession is more than verbal even. So maybe some of the Pharisees like Nicodemus, there was also Joseph, Josephus, who, the rich man who anointed the Lord and with spices and gave him his tomb. He was a Pharisee. But the chief priest, they intellectually realized, we know, Rabbi, that you're come from God, because no man can do these things except he be of God. And yet confession is more than verbal. It's more than whispering among your friends. Confession is that which identifies with Christ and everything Christ is, which is the truth of the Bible, and especially that he was God in the flesh. That's why, again, 1 John 4:2, every spirit that confesseth that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is of God. Well, what does that mean? To confess Jesus Christ has come in the flesh, that he was a good master, a good rabbi? Of course he came in the flesh. All men come in the flesh. No, that in particular has to do with the deity of Christ, that he's the Word made flesh. And it is God manifest in the flesh. 1 Timothy 3:16. And people who fail to confess this, and there are great numbers of people today that fail to confess that Jesus Christ is God. Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Muslims who are not Christian, these monotheists, all kinds of people, they stumble at that point. But even if for those who confess, they acknowledge Christ came in the flesh, that is, Jehovah God entered into the world, became a man, walked among us. Good, good. They acknowledge that. The devils also acknowledge that. But they do not identify with all the truth of the Bible, without exception. You know, we can't hold back. We have to have full identification. Christ is the Word. He's the truth. So if you're going to confess him, you need to confess both, that the Bible is the truth and here is the truth that God has revealed. And that truth, you know, God revealed in increments over times and seasons, and he saved a good deal of the truth until the time of the end. And at the time of the end, he brought forth an abundance of true doctrine, of things that have been sealed, and all kinds of people. They would not, they were very much like the chief rulers, and they believe these things. I still remember talking with people coming to our fellowship group. And by the way, E-Bible Fellowship is a ministry. We are not a fellowship group. We are not a fellowship group in the sense that Delco Fellowship, that's the fellowship I'm referring to, had a fellowship group. We are a Christian ministry. And well, anyway, I remember people coming to our Delco Fellowship group and saying, you know, they were coming from the church and listening to Mr. Camping, and they said, yeah, I hear what he's saying. I can see a lot of it. I see a lot of it, but there's always a but, you know, but why don't any of the pastors agree with him? Or, but, you know, my wife doesn't believe these things, and she's let me know if you know, I come out of the church and try to take the children out of the church. There was always a but, always a but. And a lot of those people never left the church, which means they failed to confess him. Confession requires hearkening, which is listening and acting with obedience. And they did not do it. So they did not confess Jesus. And Christ tells us, you know, for those who fail to confess him among men, in Matthew 16, he says, in Matthew 16, in verse 24, then said Jesus unto his, in verse 24, then said Jesus unto his disciples, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. I don't think this is the verse I was looking for. Oh, it's Luke 10. Luke 10. Yeah, I think that's it. Luke 10, where we read in Luke chapter 10, yeah, no, can't find it here either. Well, I was looking for something where whoever denies him, he will deny them. I'm not sure where it is, but that just means, of course, that whoever denies Christ was never elect. They were not chosen by God before the foundation of the world. And so at some point, especially when tested, when tried, they will pull back. They will turn from the severity of the test. Oh, I didn't sign up for this. You know, I thought being a Christian would be much easier than this. They don't say that, but that's basically what it comes down to. The the fire, the spiritual flames are too hot, and how can one who is not saved continue to confess him? Such as after May 21, 2011 would be an excellent example, when it seemed like for a short while anyway, that the whole world and all in the churches were looking disdainfully upon God's people who had declared the message of May 21 Judgment Day. And unsurprisingly, numbers couldn't stand the heat, and they turned back. They got away from that as quickly as possible in some cases. But the elect, we have nowhere to go. You know, thou hast the words of eternal life, and well, we don't understand what's happening, but we have full identification with your word. We are witnesses of the truth of your word, and so we just stayed put and waited on the Lord, and then he began to reveal many more things in explanation for what took place. But thank you for those verses, and let's go to the next caller this evening. Welcome to our new open forum program. Please go ahead with your call. Hello? Hello, can you hear me? I don't know what the problem is.
I'm still.
Hello? Hello? Was that the caller? Was that the
No,
caller?
that was the previous caller. I'm asking the next person to unmute, and they might have stepped away.
Yeah, he could be busy. Why don't we go to the one after that?
Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Hi. Can you please read Isaiah 14, verse 30?
Isaiah 14:30. That says, well, let me start in verse 29. Rejoice not thou whole Palestina, because the rod of him that smote thee is broken. For out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, and his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent. And the firstborn of the poor shall feed, and the needy shall lie down in safety. And I will kill thy root with famine, and he shall slay thy remnant.
And then can you read Isaiah 16, verses 12 to 14?
Yeah, Isaiah 16, verse 12. It shall come to pass when it is seen that Moab is weary on the high place, that he shall come to his sanctuary to pray, but he shall not prevail. This is the word that Jehovah has spoken concerning Moab since that time. But now Jehovah hath spoken, saying, within 3 years, as the years of a hireling, and the glory of Moab shall be contemned, with all that great multitude, and the remnant shall be very small and feeble.
Okay, thanks. In both these verses, it mentions remnant. So my first question is, can remnant also refer to the unsaved? And who are the remnants referring to in both verses? And my second part is, does within 3 years have to do, or can within 3 years be likened to within 3 days? And does it have to do with the final judgment on the corporate church? And would it be May 21st, 2011? Thank you.
It's possible, but I can't think of a proof that 3 years could be 3 days. We know God does, work the other way, where three days could be 3 years, or 40 days could be 40 years. A day for a year. And so it's possible, but I can't think of a proof for that. As far as your question, I can answer the first part about can the unsaved be considered the remnant. I don't know the answer to the second part because I haven't worked on these verses and I don't understand them. But yes, the unsaved can be called the remnant. A remnant is kind of that which remains, and when referred to the elect, it's a small number. It's a small number, a remnant of the whole of mankind. Like the inhabitants of the earth are burned, few men left. So that would be a remnant. The whole world of Noah's day perishes in the flood. Those on board the ark are the remnant. But in Revelation 9, we read of a remnant in in verse 18. I'll start there. By these three was the third part of men killed by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone which issued out of their mouths. This is speaking of the 200 million that were loosed out of the great river Euphrates, Babylon's river, and they had been bound, and now they're the same as the 4 angels or 4 messengers. The 200 million are one and the same with the 4 messengers, of whom it was said in verse 14, saying to the 6th angel which had the trumpet, loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the third part of men. So you see, the 4 angels are to slay. They're prepared to slay the third part of men, but who actually does the slaying? It picks up in verse 16, and the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000. That's 200 million. And I heard the number of them, and thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. By these 3 was the third part of men killed. That is, by the fire, the smoke, and the brimstone, coming from was it the horses? I saw the horses in the vision, and the horsemen, of course, are upon the horses, the 200 million horsemen, and that's who slays the third part of men. One and the same with the 4 angels, 4 messengers, as God is using 4 to represent universality of all his messengers, who are the elect, that were bound in the great river Euphrates are bound in Babylon, Babylon being the world, and all sinners are who were chosen by God to obtain salvation were bound to their sin in the kingdom of Satan. But by the end of the Great Tribulation, by the date of May 21, 2011, all were loosed. And binding ties in with bondage to sin and to Satan, loosing with salvation, deliverance. And so all the captives are set free, spiritually speaking. You can leave the great river. You can come out of Babylon, and that's what Revelation 18 tells us. Come out of her, my people. It's the time at the very end of the Great Tribulation when the elect are called, come out of Babylon. And so I'm saying that to indicate by these three, by the 200 million, the fact that God saved everyone whose name was recorded in the Lamb's Book of Life, each and every elect individual, the whole house of Israel, the fact that he saved them allowed him to bring judgment on the world, to shut the door and put out the light of the gospel. And therefore, by these three, this wrath coming forth from the 200 million, Christ comes with all his saints, was the third part of men killed. And the third part from the previous chapter, again and again and again, third part of the sun, third part of the moon, repeatedly, the third part is used to identify with the churches and congregations. And this is telling us on the date of May 21, on that date itself, not necessarily, no need to go into the judgment or prolonged judgment day, no need to go May 22nd, May 23rd, or until our present time, but immediately, once judgment day came, the third part of men were killed. That is, everyone who remained within the churches and congregations. Everyone, all 2 billion about, according to some estimates, were killed at that point. They were tares bundled for the burning of the wrath of God, and their eternal fate was established, but also known. That is, we know God sent forth the gospel during the Great Tribulation, the latter rain, to save the great multitude, to save 200 million. And yet there was no latter rain within any church. So no one who stayed within the church could have possibly been saved by the latter rain. You had to go out of the church, which was why God commanded his people to depart out of the midst. Go, flee to the mountain. All who remain behind, no spirit activity. The spirit departed out of the midst of the church. No, it doesn't matter if they had the word. Without the spirit, it's impossible to become saved. And therefore, May 21, 2011, the latter rain concluded, and now it's impossible to be saved outside the church. So even if they come out, it doesn't matter. And so we can know absolutely. We don't have to know the individuals, but just, this is what the Bible teaches. We're not looking at any individual. We're not pointing the finger at any man or woman. We're just declaring what the Bible teaches, which is that all within the church, it is just the fact, could not have been saved during the latter rain, and therefore, entering into judgment day, they're burned, they're destroyed, they're done. but the latter rain fell among the nations, which means, the other 5 billion people that are on the earth who are alive at that time, we can't know. We can't know. We can't have that same, full knowledge and absolute understanding that those in the church, they couldn't possibly have been saved, but these others, potentially the 200 million is among them. We know that, and we don't know who the 200 million are. And therefore, that divides these two groups, and that's what's going on here. So after saying the third part of men, that's everyone in the church that refused to obey God's command to get out, were killed by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth and in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents and had heads, and with them they do hurt. Now, don't want to get into that, but if you look at the language concerning the tails of the 200 million and the horses and so forth, it matches, or it's very similar to the locusts, because they're one and the same. The locusts are the elect. But then in verse 20, and this is where the word remnant comes in, and the rest of the men, and I believe the word rest is translated remnant. The remnant of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. We see that since they fail to repent, they're unsaved. And so the remnant of the men not killed by these plagues, that is, they weren't in the church. They're not part of the third part. They're of the nations. They're the unsaved of the nations, and there's a great number of them. Let's say the number was actually 200 million, since that number is used in this passage, that God saved, and they would be among those of the nations. And we know right around May 21, the world population was about 7 billion. And so was estimated that 2 billion were in the church, 5 billion in the world. That would still leave 4,800,000,000 unsaved that would fall under the category of the rest of the men, the remnant. Now they're the majority. That's the majority of people on earth. Yet the rest, in the sense of God was speaking of the third part, and then there's the rest. There's this other group. By the way, this explains the hardness of heart we see in the world. The world is going through turmoil, constant trouble. God shut down the world for a full 2 years, and in some nations it went into a third year, and did a lot of damage to the world through the pandemic. And you would think, since God shut down practically society across the face of the earth for a prolonged period of time, 2 years out of 22-year judgment period, it's not quite 10%, maybe it's about 7 or 8%, but that's, a significant period of time where there was all kinds of economic problems worldwide. Of course, there was health problems. Many were dying there was just the threat of death, the threat of disease and falling ill, and we would think, that the world might get the idea, God is not pleased with us. God is not pleased with us, and I wonder what is there anything we're doing that we should stop doing? And all these things is exactly what the world is doing, has been doing. They repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils, idols of gold, silver, brass, stone, wood, and neither repented they of their murders or sorceries or fornication or thefts. Murders such as abortion worldwide. It's in the scores of millions. I recently Googled the number of abortions worldwide in 2023, and who knows how accurate, but the result was 30 million in 1 year. 1 year in the day of judgment, after God is already troubling the inhabitants of the earth, and people aren't turning from it. And of course, there's chaotic madness on the streets in many places, and all kinds of high murder rates, actual physical murder, as well as the spiritual understanding of these things, and no repentance, because what did God do to Pharaoh? He hardened his heart. Once God has determined to bring judgment, to destroy a vessel that has been fitted to wrath, and that's the language of Romans chapter 9. If we turn over there, in Romans 9, we read in verse, where was the reference to Pharaoh here? In verse 17, for the scripture saith unto Pharaoh, even for this same purpose have I raised thee up, that I might show my power in thee, and that my name might be declared throughout all the earth. And then in verse 21, hath not the potter power over the clay of the same lump to make one vessel unto honor and another unto dishonor? What if God, willing to show his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath fitted to destruction? That word fitted is also translated as prepared in Hebrews 10:5. A body thou hast prepared me. And so they have been prepared for destruction. God prepared Egypt for destruction through Pharaoh, through the hard-hearted mindset of Pharaoh, who refused, out of pride and arrogance, refused to let God's people go. And so as a result, plague after plague after plague came upon Egypt, until Pharaoh's own servants said, knowest thou not yet that Egypt is destroyed? And he still refused to let them go. He finally seemed to relent when God brought the death of the firstborn, and he did let them go, but then his heart hardened even more, and he pursued after them to the point of his own destruction, the destruction of his army, of his chariot army. And so we can see God allowing men, in their blindness, in their ignorance of understanding and blindness of heart, to continue in their wicked ways, despite the fact that evil, the wrath of God, is going from nation to nation and troubling all inhabitants of the earth in numerous ways. And they persist. And I think based on this, they repented not. They repented not. I believe it's also used in Revelation 19, Revelation 19, the word remnant, we find in verse 19. Remnant's not in that verse, but beginning in verse 19. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. This is the battle of Judgment Day, our present battle. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him. And the beast would be Satan. The false prophet can also be Satan, but it has full identification with the corporate church remade in the image of the beast. So the beast and false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that had worshipped his image, these both were cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone. So again, emphasis on judgment on the church, the burning lake of brimstone, just like Revelation 9, third part are killed, but then there's a remnant. There's a remnant, the people of the world. And here too, in verse 21 of Revelation 19, and the remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which sword proceeded out of his mouth, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh. The remnant, that's the unsaved of the nations. They're slain. The word of God, the Bible has slew them, and it's the Bible, the word of God, that is working out this judgment, this prolonged judgment day period, and will ultimately destroy them. But isn't it interesting? It doesn't say they're cast into the lake of fire with the beast and the false prophet. No, it's the word. So to answer your question again, yes, in these two verses especially, we see, and the remnant is the same word as the rest of the men, we see that the reference to a remnant can identify with the ungodly, but I don't understand. I've never looked into or studied those chapters, let alone those verses in Isaiah.
That was very interesting, Chris. Thank you.
Well, thank you for calling and sharing those verses. And let's go to the next person on the phone tonight. Welcome to our new open forum program. Please go ahead with your call.
Hi, I just want to make sure you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay, I have a two-part question. One's more complicated, one's not. I was wondering which one. Can I ask two?
I think so.
Okay. All right. Could you please go to Luke 11:30 and 36?
Luke 11:30.
I'm sorry, Luke chapter 10, verse 30.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Luke 10.
Luke 10.
Yeah,
okay.
sorry.
Luke 10, verse 30. And Jesus answering said, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment and wounded him and departed, leaving him half dead. And then verse 36.
Yeah.
Let me read more so we understand what's going on. Verse 31. And by chance there came down a certain priest that way, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him, and went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the morrow, when he departed, he took out 2 pence and gave them to the host, and said unto him, take care of him, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. Which now of these three thinkest thou was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves?
Thank you. I was doing a Bible study on these words and looking at the spiritual meaning, and I was curious. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but in verse 30, it says fell among thieves, and then verse 36, fell among thieves. It's two different words. One is to follow among, 4045, third verse, and then in verse 37, it's to fall into, to be trapped by 1706. So my question is, since Jesus was telling a parable about this man, I was wondering, he meant fallings as like
I'm sorry.
the second.
I'm not sure if you're breaking up.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that again?
Okay. Am I breaking up?
Well, here, let me tell you what I heard, that there's different words fell among from verse 30 and verse 36. They're two different Greek words.
Yes.
Okay, and but what after that?
Oh, I was wondering if there's two, would be one before in the tribulation in the churches, and then afterwards, now people are falling into temptation, or being trapped by,
Yeah, I don't know. I never looked at that. I do know that the really this man who fell among thieves is a picture of someone who's in their sin, and he's stripped of his raiment, which means he's naked, and really the thieves here, I think a lot of this parable has to do with the falsehood in religion, because a den of thieves, you've turned my father's house into a den of thieves, and so false gospels, false religion, really strips people. They claim to cover over sin, but it's like a fig leaf. It's not true clothing or covering for sin. Only Christ can provide that. Only, the true gospel can bring that. And so this leaves the man, stripped him of his raiment. He's naked, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead, in his, in a desperate spiritual condition. He's not fully dead, because there's still hope of salvation. And then by chance came down a certain priest. He passed by on the other way, so the priest has no gospel for him, no help for him. And a Levite came and looked at him, passed by on the other side. So it's the religious leaders of Israel. God's really giving, a bad report of the gospel of Israel at that time, and this would apply to the gospel of the churches. They cannot help the man with their gospel. Spiritually is what it's saying. They can't clothe him. They can't heal his wound. The false gospel can only make worse. And then comes a certain Samaritan. The Samaritan's a type of Christ. In John 8:47-48, Jesus is actually called a Samaritan. Say we not, well, thou art a Samaritan and hast the devil. And so here, telling a parable, he typifies himself as a Samaritan. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him. That's a trait of Jesus. And compassion on him, verse 34, and went to him and bound up his wounds. That is healing. That's what Christ does with the gospel, pouring in oil and wine. The oil and wine would identify with the gospel, you know, the message of the gospel that spiritually heals the sin-sick soul, and set him on his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. Now, the word inn is, well, according to my note, it's a compound word that means all except, all except. So all come into the inn, and then on the morrow when he departed, he took out 2 pence and gave them to the host, and said unto him, take care of him, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. Okay, so I believe the inn and the host is pointing to the corporate church over the church age, and so they were given the task of taking care of the sin sick, and also to render care, to bring the true gospel, which would heal and cause people to gain spiritual health. And then what the Samaritan says, take care of him, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again. Now this word, the Greek word translated come again, is 1880, and it's also found in Luke 19 in verse 12, we read, of a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. That's not the word. That's a different Greek word. But then we read, and he called his 10 servants and delivered them 10 pounds and said unto them, occupy till I come. But his citizens hated him and sent a message after him, saying, we will not have this man to reign over us. And it came to pass that when he was returned, that's the same word, 1880 in the concordance. When he was returned, having received the kingdom, then he commanded these servants to be called, and then he reckoned with them. So it's judgment day when he returns. In this case, take care of him, back in Luke 10:35. And whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. And this ties in with Revelation 22:12. I come quickly. My reward is with me to give. The word give in Revelation 22:12 is the same word repay. To repay every man according as his work shall be. So the good work performed during the church age. Christ came first. The beginning of his second coming was in the year 1994, because judgment began at the house of God. That was the official year judgment began at the house of God. And in order for judgment to begin, you need a judge. And the second coming of Christ has much to do with him judging. And judgment began, so he began to perform the role of judge in 1994, and over the course of the Great Tribulation. He judged on May 21, 2011, was the day of transition, where his role of judge expanded to include everyone, all unsaved inhabitants of the earth, or the whole earth itself. And so whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, when I have returned, I will repay thee. I will repay. And so there's, of course, that could be two-sided, dependent on one's works. It can be a reward, and not that doing good works will gain anyone a reward, but the elect will do good works and be commended. And it's all of God. It's all from the Lord. He moves within his people to will and to do of his good pleasure. So he ultimately gets all the glory.
Thank
But
you.
but
and
as
you
far
answered-
as far as the different words, I don't know the reason for that. I don't think it's based on what were you saying, like church age, and then what was the second?
The Judgment Day, because
Yeah, in a sense, but it's referring back to the first, right?
Okay.
It's really a recap in verse 36. Now, which of these three thinkest thou was neighbor unto him that fell among thieves? So it's referring back to the first instance. It's not speaking of like a second different event. It's referring to the same.
Okay, thank you. And then you answered my second question. I didn't know who this Samaritan was, so thank you for that.
Oh, okay, good. All right. Well, thank you for calling and sharing. And I would like to thank everyone for being with us tonight, sharing your questions and comments, and especially the Bible verses we had a chance to read and consider, which is always a blessing. Lord willing, we'll have another open forum program tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And by the way, for your information, we've been thinking about changing the time for the rest of the week. We've been 6 p.m. for a while now, and we're thinking of changing it. I don't want to mention the time yet. There's still a couple things need to be checked out. But it could be next week that we have a whole new schedule for the Q&A, and I'll try to let you know as soon as we work out these details. It's scheduling details we want to make sure of before mentioning it, just to keep that in mind. But thank you again for being with us tonight. May you have a good night, and may the Lord's perfect will be done.
Thanks again for joining us for E-Bible Fellowship's live open forum program. You can call in with your Bible questions Mondays and Tuesdays, Thursdays and Fridays beginning at 6 p.m. Eastern, and Wednesdays beginning at noon Eastern.